Hello, everybody. My name is Kitty, and I will be your host for today's Etcher Live demo. And I am here with Wendy from Wendy Paints.
Hi
And
everyone.
hi, everybody. And just a little reminder that our demos are not step-by-step tutorials. It's an opportunity for Wendy to showcase her process. So, however, you are more than welcome to follow along today if you wish. The reference photo is at the bottom of the description of the video, but for ease, I'm going to go ahead and put that into the chat right now. There's the link. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat in all capital letters so it's easier for me to see it. If the question is relevant to what Wendy is doing at the moment, I will ask her at that time. If not, then I will save it to the end when we do our question and answer session. Oh, wow, we have people coming in from all over the place. From British Columbia, Ontario, Portugal, Slovenia, Canada, everywhere. Awesome.
Wow, nice. Awesome.
Cool.
Thanks for
Well, thank
joining
you
us.
for joining us. And I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Wendy, who will tell us a little bit about what we're going to do today. Wendy, take it away.
Thanks, Kitty. Thanks for joining me, everyone. So my name's Wendy, and I'm from Australia, and I've been painting pet portraits for a while now. So I'm going to show you before we get started some of the work that I've done. So I'll just show you here quickly. I mainly paint a lot of cats and dogs. So I'm just going to go through each of these. So we have like a close up of a cat's eye here. Another cat. And a lot of what I like doing during pet portrait paintings is the eye, which is why that's also the feature that I've decided to choose for today's demo. So these are just a couple of different pieces. These ones take upwards about 3 hours or so, but the eye painting that I'll be doing will definitely fit into the time frame that we have today. So,
Wendy, I am so sorry I did not have you spotlighted. Would you please
oh,
show those again real
sure.
quick? Thank
No
you.
worries. Yeah, I'll go through. So these are a couple of different cats and dogs that I've painted, and so the eye is what I really love to paint. So that's why I'm focusing on that for this demo. And then when I do my mini workshop, it will be an entire dog. But here are just some of the pieces that I've painted of cats and dogs.
And
So an
Wendy,
outline. Yep.
I just wanted to let you know there was a comment in the chat saying, love Wendy's shirt.
Oh, it says not today.
I know.
Yeah, it's very early for me in the on a weekend. I'm usually not awake at this time, but yeah, really excited to be painting early in the morning. So see, so this is the reference photo that we'll be using today, and I thought what I'd do is I'll talk you through a bit about my approach of how I'm going to be painting this eye. So the actual pupil and iris I'm going to keep in quite a realistic style. And then everything around it, including the fur and the color around it, I'm going to keep quite expressive and loose. And the reason for that is I want that to complement the eye rather than take attention away from the eye. So I'll be combining a style that's a mixture of both realistic and expressive in this painting. And then finally, we're going to go in with some white gouache at the very end to add some more details and bring a bit more contrast, so to finish the picture overall. So I have a tip before we start. When you're thinking of painting an eye to make it look realistic, one thing that would be helpful to do is to note where the lightest parts of the eye are to make sure that when you're painting to not cover those areas too much. So for example, in this reference picture here, you'll notice like this part of the eye is very bright, but in the brown part of the eye, you'll also have this area and this area that are also quite light compared to the rest of the eye. So those are just areas to keep in mind while you're painting. But if you do end up covering over it, it's okay. You can simply lift off some of that color, which I'll show you. So I'm just going to keep this reference picture in the corner because I think that might be helpful so that you don't have to refer to two screens at once. And I'll go through the colors that I'll be using for today. I'll be using 5 different colors. I've got quinacridone gold, burnt sienna, Venetian red, ultramarine blue, and neutral tint. So I think burnt sienna and ultramarine blue most people would have in their palette. If you don't have quinacridone gold, you can simply use like an Indian gold or a warm toned deep yellow color, and mix it in with a little bit of the burnt sienna to kind of have a little bit of that rusty color. The Venetian red is more like an opaque watercolor, and it is a little bit deeper than the burnt sienna. If you have maybe like an English red or an Indian red or any red iron oxide shade, you could swap that out for that color that you have. And finally, neutral tint, you can use black or any really dark color that you have in your palette. So those are the materials that I'll be using. Oh, and one more thing is the brushes. So for the majority of the eye, I'll be using this one brush. This is a size 0 Tintoretto quill brush. And then finally with the details at the very end with white gouache, I'll be using just a smaller round brush. So let's get started. I'll just keep my palette here so you might be able to see me mixing the colors. So I'm just going to dampen my brush, and I'm actually not going to pre-wet the paper. I feel like a damp brush is sufficient for this, and the reason why I'm not pre-wetting the paper is the area that we're working with is quite small, and just for better color control and water control, I'm just going to go in with the color and then use a damp brush to soften out any edges. So let's start with the quinacridone gold. I'm going to use a little bit of that. And so I'm going to place the quinacridone gold in the lightest brownish part of the eye. So in that reference picture, it'll be this area here. So I'm going to start on this side of the eye. And then, so I'm just going in straight away and then just using a bit of water to soften out that edge. Now, when I paint a lot of these pet portraits, I like to layer my work quite a lot. So we build up a lot of layers to get like that depth of color and variations in the color. So you will see me applying many different layers, and yep. And then now I'm going to also apply a bit of that quinacridone gold on this side, even though that's not going to be the final color, but I just want to keep a little bit of that there. And then I'm going to go in with the burnt sienna. And with the burnt sienna, I want to darken some of the corners on the eye just to start building up some of that color.
And Wendy, what kind of brush are you using today?
I'm using a size 0 quill brush. So it's a bit like a mop brush, but it has a pretty sharp point, and this is a synthetic squirrel. And I recommend for these types of paintings to use a brush that holds a lot of water, because I find those to be great for softening out any harsh edges when you want to use a damp brush to do that.
And we have a question in the chat. Do you ever start with a drawing?
Yes, so I've left the pre-sketch of the eye, I think also in as well as the reference picture. So I do like to start off with a very basic sketch, but I don't put in much of the detail. So I don't usually I don't usually sketch out any of the fur details, because I find a lot of that comes from the actual painting process itself. But for the eye, like just a basic shape of the pupil and the outline, I feel like is sufficient for this.
We also have a couple of comments in here saying, already so many great tips, thank you. And also, thank you for doing a large eye study.
Oh yeah, I really enjoyed the larger eyes, because I feel like it really allows you to focus in on all the little details of the eye, so that when you do go and paint, you know, an overall dog later on, you feel like a bit more comfortable with what details are important and what details you can simply leave out. So yeah, I really do enjoy a lot of these larger feature studies. I'm glad you enjoy it too. Okay. And then a little bit more of the burnt sienna, I'm just applying to the edges. I'm just being careful to avoid this white area, which I'm just going to mark out. So this will be the brightest part here. So I'm just being careful not to have any color run into that. So now I'm actually going to go in with the black. So when I actually paint the black, I kind of do it a little bit differently depending on how I feel that day. Sometimes I would put in a base layer of the burnt sienna and then I pile on the neutral tint on top. Some days I go in with the neutral tint straight away and then I blend the edges with a burnt sienna. So there's many different ways you could approach it, and I feel like yeah, it doesn't really matter the exact order of the steps, but a lot of the times you can end up achieving the same result. So, but today I feel like doing the black first. I'm just painting the black part, and then I'm going in with a bit of burnt sienna and just using that to soften the edges with the black.
I'm curious, is anyone painting along with Wendy today? Let us know in the chat.
Let me know if you are. Okay. So I'm just trying to achieve that graduation of color from the black to the brown. I'm just cleaning out my brush just to make sure I don't have a lot of that black on the outside while I'm softening out that edge. And then I'm going to use the burnt sienna. And then I can see that this part here needs to be kept quite bright. So I'm just going to mark out where that is. And then I'm going to go back in and soften that area so it's not like I've just outlined this section. But while the paint is still wet, you can just soften sides like that. And then after I've done that, I want to make sure that this area here is not too white, because I do want to keep this area to be the brightest area. So I'm just going to soften the edges slightly and bring a little bit of that burnt sienna color in. Just take away a little bit of that white. And I'm going to go in burnt sienna and kind of pink in.
And for those of you who are following along, we would love to see what you've painted today. So I've just put our tags in the chat, and also Wendy's handle on Instagram, which is Wendy Paints, where you can also see more of her beautiful work.
And then as you build up the layers, you'll start to notice, like, for example, some areas you might find you want to build up a little bit more of that color. So I'm just going back in with that quinacridone gold and just applying it a little bit to this edge. And then softening that out.
And Wendy, we have a question regarding the lighter areas of the image. Do you prefer to leave an area untouched, or do you tend to use masking fluid?
Oh, rarely ever, if not never, use masking fluid. And for me, I think I've just had bad experiences with masking fluid. So I tend to personally not use it, but I know that many artists do enjoy using it. For the work that I do, I felt like I've never really needed to use masking fluid in any pet portraits that I've painted. And any area where if you've accidentally covered up with a color that you wanted to keep white, I can show you later when I go back in with gouache to bring out some of those highlights. So I don't think it's not too important to use masking fluid when you're painting pet portraits, but that's just for me personally. Yeah,
Great, thank you.
no worries. And then I'm just going to increase saturation here. And I'm going in with a bit heavier wash. So previously I used to mix in a bit of water into the paint, but as I start to build up the layers, now with the burnt sienna, I'm kind of going in with a heavier, like more pigment to less water. So you can see the layers start to build up. And then I'm going to use a little bit of Venetian red just to kind of vary up the color slightly. And I'll mix it with a little bit of the ultramarine blue. So I get kind of like a darker neutral color. It looks something like this. So not as dark as the neutral tint, but it does provide a bit more of that contrast to the eye. And then this line here, I'm going to go down to like where that water line is for the dog. So that's this line here.
And Wendy, I actually have a question about your color palette.
Sure.
So obviously these colors, you're using these colors for this particular image. Do you use the same general colors on most of your drawings, or do you change your palette according to the picture?
I do change my palette a little bit based on the picture, but a lot of my staples when I'm painting pet portraits are burnt sienna and ultramarine blue because I can get a lot of variations of mixes with those two, especially around more like the neutral colors. I do a lot of mixing between this color and this color. So the burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, and I also do a lot of mixing between Venetian red and ultramarine blue, and sometimes even between burnt sienna and neutral tint. And if the dog is a little bit darker, I bring in like a burnt umber. And if they're on the lighter side, I'll use raw sienna or burnt or a raw umber. But yeah,
And
I do vary it slightly, but I feel like there are some staples that you can just keep for painting pets.
and Wendy, if I could ask you to speak up just a little bit, while
Yep,
you're working, the sound is getting a little bit muffled.
sure, yep.
Thank
I'll try
you.
and speak a bit louder. Is this better?
Yes, as it is. Thanks.
Yep. Is this better? Okay, great. So I'm going to leave I'm going to leave this as it is for now. And what I like to do is I don't like to finish one part of the eye before moving to the next. I kind of like to work, if I'm about like 70% done, I move to the next area because what I feel is that once you start filling in the different areas, you can then see which parts do you need to add more contrast to and which parts you need to lighten up. So I feel like that. So I'm going to move on to this area of the eye here. I'll come back to the rest of the eye later, but I want to talk about this white section. And you'll notice that in the eye, you can see a bit of that blue color, and that blue is usually a reflection of the sky in the highlights of the eye. So I'm going to go in with a bit of ultramarine blue, maybe just a touch of burnt sienna, and just apply that to the tops of the eye, focusing on the top. And then with a damp brush, I'm just going to pull down some of that color. You get like a soft effect. Just be careful that you don't end up pulling into the black here, because then your black color is going to bleed. Oh, I think I'm frozen. Am I frozen? Okay.
Nope, I see you.
Okay. Yep. So I just want to avoid the black part, because otherwise that black is going to bleed into the whiter parts of the eye. And I'm going to wait for this blue to dry a little bit. And once it's dried off a little bit, I'm going to add in the eyelashes. So the shadow of the eyelashes that you'll see here, I'll add in a little bit later. And while that's drying, so while each area is drying, I like to move around the eye and work on the other parts. So here I'm just going to add in a little bit more.
And we have some lovely comments in the chat saying this is so interesting and so incredible already. People thanking you for the tips.
Thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying it.
I think this subject matter can be really intimidating for a lot of people, and you're making it so accessible. I really appreciate this.
Thank you. I'm really glad. I'm glad to be able to break it down into more digestible steps, because I feel like, yeah, when I first started, it was definitely difficult to know just by looking at a picture what to paint first. So it was a lot of trial and error, and I'm glad to be able to now share some of that with you all. Okay, and now I'm going to go in with a bit more burnt sienna, and just to add that between the darker part and then the quinacridone gold section, just to give it a bit more depth. And then also in here. And then I might pick up a bit of the Venetian Red and just drop it in certain parts of the eye, just to bring in a little bit more color variation.
It's already starting to look 3D.
In with the, yeah, usually while you're building the layers, you'll notice that it's starting to look more realistic. So I definitely recommend to do this slowly in different layers. And also, if the brush holds a lot of water, that really helps as well. So this part of the eye has dried a little bit. So I'm going to go in and use the ultramarine blue again, but mix in with a little bit of that neutral tint. And you probably should be maybe using a detail brush for this, but I tend to just stick to one brush for the entire painting. So I'm just going to add in some lines towards the center like this. And just opening out part. And this is representing the the shadow that is cast by the eyelashes.
So we have a question in the chat. So I know earlier you said you go right onto the paper without wetting it, but at this point, are you working mostly wet into wet?
Sorry, I missed you there, Kitty.
Oh, can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh,
I
you can
think
hear
it's
me.
cutting in
Okay.
and out a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, good. So the question is about, are you working mostly wet into wet now that you're working on the eye?
Yes, so as I'm building up the layers are slightly damp, so and I'm using the wet in wet to basically just soften out and blend out the edges.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm also keeping 2 glasses of water because if you're working with a lot of dark colors, it can get dark quite quickly, and especially when I want to paint over the lighter areas, you don't want to mix in that darker neutral tint into your lighter areas. Okay, and then I'm going to do this, which it looks like the eyeliner of the dog's eye. And you can let that black bleed in slightly into this part. It's okay as long as it's just focused around the tops area. And then using a bit of Venetian Red and the ultramarine blue, I'm going to just place maybe a bit more Venetian Red. Just a little bit of that darker color towards the bottom of the eye. And then I just use a bit of water to kind of bridge that gap where I have the white.
Oh, nice.
And then while this is damp, I just run my brush across like this. And that kind of gives it like a fur texture, but without, having to really paint in each strand of fur. So this part of the eye is where it starts to get a little bit more soft and expressive and not as detailed and realistic as the actual eye itself. And I'm also going to do the same for the top part. So I tend to kind of just adjust my color on the paper as I go. So I think some people like to, paint it on a scrap piece of paper to see how it looks. I kind of just place it on the paper and then see how it fits in with the rest of the image before I make adjustments.
And Wendy, a question just occurred to me. Based on the kind of texture and the detail that you're doing, what kind of paper are you using?
Oh, I'm using the Etcher, the Perfect Sketchbook. But if you don't have that, I recommend any kind of 100% cotton paper. The 100% cotton paper is really important, I feel like, for painting these, because it just works a lot better with the water absorbency and the textures that you're able to achieve, and also the drying time. I've also worked with paper that is not 100% cotton, and I don't feel like I can achieve the same effects that I can on 100% cotton paper.
And is it cold press or hot press?
Cold press.
Cold press, okay.
Yeah. So usually I would paint in a line like this, and then using a damp brush, I just go over the sides to soften that out. This eye, I feel like, is the more difficult eye to paint because I'm right-handed, and I feel that movements towards the left side is always not as natural for me as movements towards like the right side like this. So yeah, I probably should have chosen a reference that's the other eye, but this is the more difficult eye to paint, I guess. So it's good that we're starting with this one. And then using a bit more of the neutral tint, just to add a bit more darkness and depth into the eyeliner here. So I'm just adding some darker areas to the sides, and then I join the two with a bit of water just to get a bit of different variations happening, and you don't have like a solid line going on. And then I'm just dragging that out to the sides to get more of that textured look.
And Wendy, we are just at the halfway point, so I think this might be a good time to talk about your mini workshop.
Oh yeah, so my mini workshop will be an entire dog. Actually, I have the image. Let me just
great.
move this out of the way. So I have the dog that I will be painting. So this is the dog that we will be painting for the mini workshop. So the reason why I did the eye for the demo is because I think you'll feel a lot more comfortable painting the eye later after you've done a larger eye study. And then I'm going to go into depth about the fur textures, knowing which details are important and also which details are not important when painting a pet portrait. And so this one will be in more of like an expressive style, but still keeping some areas realistic. And I feel like when the eye is kept quite realistic, you retain some of that realism while you can be more soft and expressive on the other areas of the dog, like the fur. So this is what we'll be painting for the mini workshop.
Excellent. And that will be on August 28th. And I've just dropped the link to registration in the chat. And they do tend to sell out. So if you're interested, you want to sign up as soon as you can. And they are an hour and a half long. So you have a little bit longer with Wendy so she can go into more detail with you.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm just adding more depth to the top of the eye. And I find that when the tops and the bottom of the eye are kept quite dark, it really brings in that focus into the center of the eye, which is where you want a lot of that attention to be.
And Wendy, can you speak up just a little bit more again?
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure. Is this a bit better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, no worries.
I can't believe it's only been a half an hour and there's that much detail in that. It's just beautiful.
Thank you. Okay. So now I'm going to go back into the eye a little bit. So I feel like I need a little bit more blending around this area. So I'm going to use a burnt sienna and just apply it to that part and blend out the edges. You want to soften it with some, and I'm going to soften it with some water. Okay. And also this part of the eye, I feel like is looking a little bit too bright and it's competing for attention with this white space. So I'm just going to use a damp brush and kind of just scrub at the little edges slightly and bring in some of that color. If you've like accidentally done that too much and you feel like you've filled in the white too much, then you can use a damp brush and lift off some of that color. But I feel like that's looking a little bit better, and that this area is a little bit dimmer than it was before. Because you want this part of the eye to be the brightest. Okay, and then I'm just going to go back in and add a bit more neutral tint in the side. And while it's wet, you'll notice that black kind of feathers out because now I'm going wet in wet, and you get more of like that soft look as the black starts to bleed slightly to the outside edges. Okay, while that's drying, I'm going to start working on the fur around it. And this part I'm going to keep very loose. So, okay, I just noticed this is traveling a bit too much. So I'm just going to kind of stop the flow a little bit with the brush. Okay. And then now with this part of the fur, I'm going to use a Venetian Red with a little bit of ultramarine blue. So just to, so I use the ultramarine blue to kind of tone down the warmth of the Venetian Red, and I'm going to feel like it needs a little bit more water. And this part I like to do with pretty loose brush strokes. And then using water to help me soften some of those edges. And then now using just a little bit of burnt sienna for color variation, just drop in a few different colors into that area, just to give it that fur texture and color. And also I'm going to use a damp brush to connect that to the darker area, so we don't have like a very harsh white area. So this is where a lot of the painting is done quite softly. I feel like this is more a stage for the eye, so that's why I'm keeping a lot of that quite soft. And then, oops. And then now I'm working wet on wet to add in a bit of fur detail, but while it's wet in wet, it's going to have that soft look to it. I'm just using these brush strokes to add in some fur detail, but not being too precise with it, and just yeah, keep it quite loose. And I'm going to add in, oh, that's way too much. Add in a little bit of burnt sienna. And put that in here. And then I'm going to do the same for the bottom part of the eye. So I might just blend this out a little bit more.
It's really starting to show a lot of dimension.
Yeah. And for the bottom part of the eye, I'm going with a lot of water to do the same. So I'm gonna just trying to think if I go this way. So just cleaning out my brush. And then using just a damp brush to kind of bridge the two together. Now I want, now that I'm looking at this now, I think I want to darken this part. I'm going to bring in more of a ultramarine blue, just to give it a bit more of a cool tone look with these sides and this here. Yeah, so this part I'm working wet on wet. And then I realized this part I haven't actually filled in yet, so I'm going to use a bit of burnt sienna and just cover that up, but also with a bit of ultramarine blue. And a little bit of Venetian red. I'm just going to drag this down here. If there's too much blue, you can just kind of cover it over with another color.
And Wendy, we have about 20 minutes left.
Yep, sure. So at about 10 minutes left, I'll probably start adding in the more detailed parts with the white gouache.
Great.
Yeah. So at this stage, I think I'm going to go back into the eye now. Now that everything's been darkened, you'll notice that this eye probably needs a little bit more darkness around the edges just to bring in that spherical look to the eyeball. So I'll use a burnt sienna just to darken some parts of the eye.
And we already have people signing up for your mini workshop.
Oh, thank you. And then if I look at the reference photo here, you'll notice that there is a little bit of darkness at that lower edge. So I'm going to add that in, but I'm not going to use neutral tint. I feel like it's a bit too strong for that area. So I'm going to mix in a ultramarine blue with a bit of Venetian red. This will give me a more neutral color, but not too strong. So I'm just going to add that here. And then using a burnt sienna, going to just soften out, add a bit more of that transition. And then going back in with quinacridone gold in this part of the eye. And I'm going to just use a damp brush with no pigment on it. And just, it's going to take a while to get the black out of my brush, but I'm going to use the water to try and soften this part. So we want kind of like a glowy eye look. Then we can darken this area here. Feel free to ask any other questions that you might have as I'm doing this part. And like at this point, it's really just building up the color saturation and the layers. So you'll see me just going back to a lot of the areas that I've already painted and building up that color and just layering on more of the colors to deepen it and to give it more of a spherical eye look. I'm going to add in a little bit more burnt sienna, maybe along here.
And Wendy, we have a question from the chat asking, what brand of paints do you use?
For these, so I really like to work with tube paints. I feel like you can get a lot of pigmentation quite quickly from that. And I'm currently using the Jackson's artist watercolors, but I don't have a specific brand preference when it comes to tubes. I feel like a lot of artist grade tubes are quite similar. So these are what I'm currently using for this eye.
Great, thank you.
No worries. So using a damp brush, so cleaning out your brush is quite important, so that when you are dragging in the damp water, you're not contaminating it with different colors. At this stage, after I drop in the color, I pretty much just use a damp brush to bring that across. Then I can add in a bit of like a dark color and paint in the fur texture. And if you've painted on the fur texture like I did here and you realize like it just looks too strong, you can just simply use a damp brush and soften that out like this. So I find that easy. It is quite easy to correct when you have like a damp brush available and one that holds a lot of water, because you can correct a lot of these mistakes at the beginning while it's still drying. Okay. And I'm just going to do the final layer here, here, here. I'm just outlining a little bit more with a darker shade. Okay. I think it's okay now to go into the white gouache. And one tip I want to give is when I work with white gouache on top of the watercolors for the details, when it comes to a pet portrait, I like to use the gouache on slightly damp watercolors. And the reason for that is I find that when you're applying gouache onto like a slightly damp area, you can really soften that white. And so it doesn't look like the white is just sitting straight on top, but you can blend it into the fur. And I feel like it gives it more of like that soft fur look. So I'm going to start adding the white gouache now. I'm just using a little tub and a small round detail brush. And I just dip it into the pot. And then, so I'm going to look at the reference picture and see where do I need to add these highlights. So for example, here, I want to add in a little bit of white here. As you can see, because it is still damp in that area, that white kind of softens and it spreads itself out, and it doesn't look like it's just sitting on top, and it's not harsh in any way. And then I'm just going to drag some of that white outwards. Just to bring in a bit more texture. And then this part of the eye, I want to bring out a little bit more. And then also some little areas you can add into the eye to kind of just give a little bit more glow to the eye. And I'm just going to add a bit more water to those areas as well. I don't want it to look too harsh. And then also just adding a bit more fur detail with a small round brush. And then I'm also going to add in a bit of white to the tops. But I find this angle really difficult to do so. So I'm actually going to rotate my sketchbook. And I really encourage you to kind of position your work in a way that feels comfortable for you. But I like to work this way when I'm doing the top, because I feel like a downward stroke is a lot easier than moving from right to left. So I just going to do that. Getting that done. And then while I'm moving on to this side, I'm happy to just rotate my sketchbook back. And then I'm also going to add in some white on this area here. If you've added too much white, I can show you later how to get rid of some of those highlights if you've overdone it. So I'm just going to add a little bit more of these areas first.
Wendy?
Yeah.
Can you remind us what the white paint is that you're using?
It's a white gouache.
Is it any particular brand?
This one is from Watercolours.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. And then if you've added too much white highlights, which I feel like I probably have overdone the highlights a little bit here, and so what I'm going to do is go back in with the watercolor. Just bring my palette back, and then I'm going to use a bit of neutral tint to separate those highlights a little bit. I'm going to go back into my quill brush and pick up some of that neutral tint. And then you can just go in between the highlights. If you've added a very strong block of highlight, you can correct it this way, just by moving the brush in between all of those highlights and increasing the darkness of that eye line here. Yeah. So you can see that I've now covered over some of those highlights where I thought it was a bit too much. And then just adding a little bit more that deeper color here. I'm using very light strokes and just kind of like barely touching the paper. And this way you get very loose brush strokes. And then I go back in with some water to soften out the edges of some of those lines. I'm going to use a little bit of burnt sienna. So I feel like we're coming to an end, like we're pretty much almost done here. But at this point, it's just a matter of adding in more layers and more color where you find it to be still lacking a little bit. So, for example, this area. I'm just mopping up some of that excess water.
And as we're getting close, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's all right. One other thing I wanted to say is while you're painting these fur strokes, just note the direction of the fur. So the fur is traveling this way, which is why my brush strokes are also following that direction of fur. And then at the bottom, it follows the direction of the fur underneath the eye as well. Yep.
And as everybody, as we're getting ready to wrap up soon, if you have any questions for Wendy, please put them in the chat. Oh, we do have a question. How do you know when to use burnt sienna or Venetian red?
Yep. So I would say I would start with burnt sienna because it is a more a transparent color. The Venetian red is more opaque, so starting with Venetian red would mean that it's harder to layer colors on top. So I would start with the burnt sienna for the initial layers, and then for any areas where you feel like that burnt sienna doesn't have enough of the pigmentation, then you would go in with the Venetian red as some of the later layers to kind of add in that extra pop of color and just to increase the saturation a bit, like I'm doing now here with the Venetian red, just to kind of add a bit more. So it's a little bit more pigmentation than the burnt sienna could offer, and it is more opaque.
And everybody, I just dropped a link into the chat for our feedback survey. We would love to hear about your experience with today's live demo. So it only takes a few moments to fill it out. Your answers are anonymous. And if you have any suggestions for us or just want to give a shout out to Wendy, you can do so there as well. And just let us know so we can continue to bring you the kind of content that you would like to see from us.
And we're pretty much done.
Awesome. It looks beautiful.
Thank you, Kitty. Thanks to everyone for joining as well. I know it's probably very late or very early for a lot of you guys. So yeah, I'm really grateful that you tuned in.
Awesome. All right, so let me go ahead and bring you back up here. So I wish we had time to go back through the chat so I could read you all these wonderful complimentary comments.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, everyone's really excited and loving all these tips and talking about how realistic it looks. And actually, we do have a question. They wanted to be reminded what kind of brush that was.
Sure. This is a Tintoretto quill brush. This is a synthetic squirrel, and I have size 0, and size 0 is the equivalent to about a size 10 round. So if you have like a silver black velvet, I would say it's about a size 10. Yeah, and this brush I use for a lot of my pet portraits, and I kind of just stick to one brush to avoid having to change up a lot of brushes throughout the painting process.
Excellent, thank you.
No worries.
Let's see, are there any other comments here? Somebody said, thank you for throwing in the little tips and tricks and underlying principles, like the downward stroke position being easier. Those are the kinds of subtleties I always hope for in demos.
Thank you. I'm glad it was very helpful for you guys. And thank you for the kind words.
All right, everybody, let's see, any more questions? Just lots of thank yous. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up. And
I hope to see many of you in the mini workshop as well.
Yeah. Oh, let me go ahead and drop that link into the chat one more time. Get this in here. And it is a 90-minute session where Wendy will be going into more detail and you can ask more questions. And also, once again, if you would care to share your experience with us today, I'm going to put the link to the feedback form in again. There we go. And I'd like to thank Wendy for sharing all of her tips and her insights. I've learned a lot today. I hope everyone else has as well. And if you painted along with us today, please, please, please share your work with us on social media and tag Wendy and Etcher Studio. We would love to see what you've done. And please do share today's link for this demo with your artist friends. We do these free live demos just about every day, so please subscribe to our channel and turn on those notifications so you can stay up to date and be alerted to when we go live. Our next demo is actually tomorrow, August 7th at noon with Cola Colette, who will be showing us how to draw some cityscapes with alcohol markers. And thank you everyone for spending time with us today. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Until we see you next time, make more art. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for joining in. Bye. Enjoy your weekend. Bye.